Hey everybody, it's Ken. How are you? And we've got Lesley back today.
Hi, Kenny.
What's going on? What's going on?
Not much.
So, good topic today. The hottest housing markets. This should be a good one. By the way, if you guys see all this data, this is Lesley. I did some myself. I had an idea. I get all this stuff too, but you went hard and deep on all this info.
I did. It was fun.
It's good. All right, before we jump in, how was your weekend? What'd you do?
Oh, it was good. Mother's Day weekend.
That's right.
So Saturday I did a little bit of noodling on the markets, but on
Of course you
Sunday
did.
I wanted to get caught up on what's happening in the market. But the kids spoiled me. It was great. They came over. We watched the Suns lose, unfortunately, but we had dinner and hung out and swam and had a great time.
Oh, good.
What about you?
I'm going to the Suns game on Dallas on Thursday.
You're taking me, yeah?
No.
No.
I went to the Kentucky Derby.
What the heck?
I know. That was awesome. And I had never been. So I was telling Jerry before, I wish I would have bet on Rich Strike because I was like thinking about it. I don't know why I didn't. It was so dumb. Anyway, what a fantastic event. Couple days. The Oaks on Friday, the Derby on Saturday. Flew back.
Perfect weekend.
Yeah.
That's great.
It was good. So
You guys looked great.
let's jump right in. All right. So there's a couple things I think that we need to frame up first. One is there's a lot of confusion, on the internet about markets, and I think that there's a couple things that we probably need to state first. There's opinions and there's facts. So facts, of course, are followed by data, but that doesn't always tell the whole story either.
Right. No.
You do have to draw an opinion from that, but you have to. And what happens, I found, is a lot of websites out there. I'm talking about so many. In preparing for today, there's a lot of people that take just a few pieces and then try to sell their markets on whatever that is. So. And sometimes there can be, ulterior motives behind that. So what I mean by that is maybe it's where they are.
Right.
And they just
they
don't see past it, right? They only see it, and maybe they're raising money for something that they're working on. So you got to back up from all of that, I think, and go into the actual data points, which we're going to talk about today. Then we're also going to talk about our conclusions, but the markets. We're going to actually predict some markets toward the end here. So let's first talk about what we would consider to be market drivers. And by the way, guys, this is how we decide on where to go. So as you guys know, we have a lot of properties and we have a lot of investors that rely on us to be in the right area. And I wrote about this in my first book, The ABCs of Real Estate Investing, that the market is more important than the property. So what's happening is a lot of people may have bought however they bought, whether they bought well or didn't buy well, the market saved their ass. So that's a big piece. So you can buy an incredible property in a market that's declining, and it's not going to matter. And you can get a great deal on it. It's not going to matter. And you can overpay on a property in a market that's on the rise, and you can do very well with it, depending on how long you hold it. So the data is so important; it drives everything. So let's start talking about what do you think are some of the top things you look at? And as you guys know, Lesley has been with the company for 22 years. And that's hard to do because the company's just 20 years old. I'm just kidding. She was with me.
It's the truth. You and I were working together before.
We were working together before. I had another company before Ross and I merged to MC Companies. She's a partner. She's managed, I don't even know how many units, a lot. And so in a lot of markets, we were just talking about, remember we flew to L.A. and met with Fernando Valenzuela. We're managing stuff. So we've been all over the country looking at deals. From the Carolinas to Florida to the Northeast, obviously Southeast, the Midwest. and the Northwest and now the Southwest. So we know brokers there. We know data there. We're certainly not perfect, but we do have a lot of contacts in a lot of the markets, right?
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
And then you've been involved in the National Apartment Association.
Right.
Which represents the entire country and the National Multi-Housing Council. And so these are things that we participate in. We do know a lot of operators. When the pandemic hit, we relied on a lot of people in a lot of markets to figure out what everyone was doing. So we do the same thing around market selection, because at the end of the day, we're investing people's money, and we want to make sure that we're investing in the right markets. So let's start with your number one indicator.
Population.
Yeah.
It gotta be a good indicator that they've got at least a population that's on the rise. Not just that they have it. What's it doing?
Yeah. So let's talk that through real quick. So sometimes when you look at data, you've got population growth as far as numbers, and then you've got population growth as a percentage. They're very different. So if you have a town, let's say a small town, like say Boise, Idaho, then you're starting with a small number as compared to a number like Phoenix. So when you're looking at the actual number, it might be very low as compared to something like Phoenix, but the percentage, in other words, the percentage of population growth that it's putting on that actual market, can be significant.
Agree.
Right. So
Agree.
It might be a small percentage for Phoenix, but it might be a large percentage for Boise, and Boise might not even show up on population growth if you're looking
in
at
terms
just
of numbers.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So we like to look at both. So as an example, the top 4 or the top 3 states were for population growth as far as numbers were Texas, Arizona, and Florida. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't really tell where they're going.
Right.
And then if you look at a percentage of growth, especially with Texas, it's not quite as good, because Phoenix really just has basically 2 big cities, Arizona, Tucson and Phoenix. So there's all these nuances that you have to look at, right?
No, agree. I think that's very smart, because some of the markets, if they've got multiple layers of markets, you got to get down into the sub market area. And I was surprised at how some of these states were growing, but then when you started to look at the individual submarkets, it may not look as good because they're spread out over a very wide area.
Yep. Well, don't save that. That's good detail for later.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. So that's kind of the point. And then the other thing is, what kind of population is it? So is it largely senior?
Right.
Right. So in Arizona and Florida, as an example, and Texas, I guess, there's a lot of seniors that are going there for weather, and maybe government policies are a little bit easier, property taxes and things like that, and safety, of course. So are they renters or not? So you have to maybe they're home buyers and maybe they're not renters. So the renter demographic, if you think about it, no matter what the spin is right around 25 to 35. Mm-hmm. That's basically the renter demographic, mm-hmm. right? So that's important too, right?
Agree.
Yep.
Agree.
All right, the next one.
Oh, jobs for sure.
Growth. Yeah. So let's talk about job growth. So again, people going back to that same scenario, if there's jobs moving to a market, and the governor, the mayor is pro job growth, then and they're actively out there trying to find employers, and they're trying to attract things like right now everybody's poaching on California, and they're saying move here, and a lot of the companies are, because of a number of reasons, and we won't go down the California path today, but the point is there's a lot of companies relocating, and we're obviously the ones moving to Texas are getting a lot of press right now,
tech,
right? Especially around like the Austin area, right?
Agree. A lot of tech jobs in particular.
Yeah. So you have to look at job growth. Those are my two drivers too. Those population growth and job growth. And notice yet we haven't gotten to rent growth, guys, and we haven't gotten to rents, or we haven't gotten to any of this stuff, but we will. But it's further down the line for us, at least, and we've kind of debated on this before this. The other thing is that you have to look at job stability. So what I mean by that is we've gone to smaller markets. So let's say a first-tier market might be, let's say, Phoenix. A second tier might be Tucson. A third tier might be Flagstaff, right? And so that's in Phoenix specifically. But the same thing with, let's say, Atlanta or Seattle or any of these markets. You're going to consider there's what we call tier 1, and then tier 2, and then tier 3. And the reason why you need to kind of break those up is because there's different things that are going on in those markets. So let's say an employer moves out of Phoenix. It's not going to really impact the city. Right. It's going to get absorbed because it's so diverse. So even if it's 1,000 jobs, but 1,000 jobs to Tucson makes a little bit bigger of a dent.
It's a good point.
Yeah. So, and then you can go even further, and it can make even a bigger of a dent. So let's talk about, some of those employers or some of those jobs that create instability, because we were talking about this before.
Well, I think it's any of those employers that are based on really one major component. Let's use like oil and gas as an example.
Oil and gas is a great one.
It's a big deal.
Yeah. So as an example, remember Midland, Texas, which is a place that you probably, I know a lot of people invested there. So, but when oil went down, Midland went poof. Yeah. And the same thing happened up in North Dakota. I think it was called the Bakken back then. But the fracking and all that stuff that was happening up in the Dakotas, in North Dakota. And so, but the minute, the price of a commodity goes up and down can dramatically affect a market. What are some others?
Well, I think gaming was a big deal during the pandemic. Clearly, Vegas got hit very hard, and not having a really diverse employment base is going to really hurt a market.
Yeah. So in fact, there were casinos in Arizona that shut down.
Agree.
And not that that's a big mecca for gaming, but we do have casinos on some of the Indian reservations, and then Vegas, of course. We've been through. I went through 9/11 with Vegas too. Same thing. It shut down. No flights in or out. And the pandemic, same thing. I went to Vegas and stayed there. It was a ghost town. The restaurants were closed down, all that kind of stuff. So the reason these are important is because those are real people that weren't working during that time, and so potentially to relocate and all that kind of stuff, because the job base was highly based on the gaming. Another one is military.
Oh, no question.
Yeah. So hopefully this doesn't come up, but over the years we've been in areas where there's been military deployment, as an example, and it's called change of station. That's what it's called. And there's a clause in the leases that let's say they say, hey, we're gonna relocate all these people to a certain base somewhere else. They can get out of their leases, right?
Well, yeah, and even the military can change their strategy. Use Sierra Vista as an example. When we were building in Sierra Vista, it was very heavily dependent upon the posts that's down there. And when the administration changed, it really changed how many people were coming in for classes. Yep. And Border Patrol went away, and it was just too heavily dependent upon that it became important for us to make sure that we were attracting residents who lived and worked in that area by choice.
Yeah.
So, but it can be difficult. It's preferable to have an employment base that's more diverse than that.
Right. Yeah. And so when things happen, and they do, I remember I was managing a property in West Richland. It was in Eastern Washington, and it had a power plant there. And so there was Kennewick, Richland, and Pasco, and they closed the power plant. They closed the power plant, and it was like a 200-unit property that poof. and nobody wanted to move to West Richland because it was the closest property to the power plant. And luckily, I was managing the property and didn't own the property, but the owner was struggling because occupancy changed as they closed down that plant. So so those are the kinds of things that we've been involved in as some of these bases and some of these things come and go, and things like oil and gas. It does need to be considered. And so when you go to a tier 1 city or a tier 2 city, you have to know that those kinds of things can be a big factor, right?
Right.
Yep. Let's go to the next one, which is supply. Now, this seems obvious, but supply. So now we've got population, job growth, supply. So right now, this is in big trouble. Supply is not something that we're seeing as an issue. In fact, we're probably generally undersupply, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Right, I do agree. We definitely have more need than what's being built even.
But in the past, we've had situations where there's been a tremendous amount of supply added, and it can very much disrupt the market.
Well, and it's also very market dependent as well.
Yeah.
Based on the foregoing, the employment and all of the population growth or lack thereof.
Yeah.
All these things go hand in hand.
They do, and so when there's like malls that are being built or office buildings that are being built or office buildings that are being relocated, like as we started to see during the pandemic, we had some of these big employers move, like to Miami. I think Goldman Sachs moved as an example. That puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the housing. Really the whole market, but specifically we're talking about housing. So that becomes, all of a sudden, there becomes massive opportunities in those areas to convert hotels and convert vacant land and things like that to try to add housing, and it raises the price of housing in those markets. So those are the kinds of things, again, obviously that's employment driven, but then you start to see the need, and then you can kind of project out. The other one is the barrier to entry, and we see this a lot. Now, barrier to entry means how easy is it to build in an area? And gosh, I'm telling you guys, it can be very dramatically different from city to city, right? You want to talk about that?
Well, there's a lot of requirements you got to be aware of before you can build. In some cities make it easy and promote that growth, and others don't.
Yeah.
And I think knowing how difficult it might be to add new supply, which can be good and bad, actually, if you think about it, because if there's too much growth, there may be an out of balance situation. You want an area that's well balanced.
Yeah, I remember in Portland they drew it's called the urban growth boundary. Just Google it, and they drew a boundary around the city, and they said everything inside of this city. That's pretty much where it's all going to happen, and they have moved the boundary a little bit because they've had some serious issues around affordability. But essentially, what it's meant to do is stop the urban sprawl, and they did it in Flagstaff too. And Flagstaff, Arizona, of all things, did an urban growth boundary. And so what it does is it's no different than having an island in the middle of an ocean and saying this is it, and you think that's the way you got to think about it. So and you can only do everything inside of this ring, so redevelopment or whatever. And then what was happening in those markets? Remember the Portland Development Commission and all the hoops, the politics to be able to jump through and build something in there. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that it takes a while to build something, and so the barrier to entry is important because. If you can build a self-storage in 3 or 4 months, or let's say an urban market, it might take 3 years. That added supply, or apartments even, that added supply can immediately throw off your returns, right?
Agree.
Yeah, and so that's what we're talking about. Is the barrier to entry. The one thing that let's move to the next one, which I love, which is the home price to the rent price. So now this is actually getting worse because of interest rates that have gone up. But let's think of one of the things that I pulled was this sheet here. So I love this. I'm going to show this. Jerry, can you show that? So essentially what this is these are the top homes and what their increases were for 2021. And then this is the monthly rent at the time. Now, of course, these things are changing. And this is probably 3 or 4 months old, but it's a very good indicator. And so the top market is the top two, Boise and Austin, where Boise's at $460 for the average home price, and Austin's $515, and the rents in Boise are $1,200, and the rents in Austin are $1,400. So basically, they have about a 30 to price to rent ratio, and what you're looking for, guys, is you're looking for a price to rent ratio that's higher. Mm-hmm. In other words, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the biggest gap between the mortgage and the rent. Because what it does as a landlord now, your renters are going to be upset with me, but as a landlord, we're looking for, how easy is it for the renter to buy a home? That's what the landlord should be looking at as you're investing in these markets. How easy is it for that renter to buy a home? And because most renters are trying to buy homes, and home ownership is promoted, so it is a factor. It's not the factor; it's a factor that you need to consider, right?
Agree. And in markets like now, we're seeing a lack of supply, so a lot of those home prices are pretty high.
Yep.
But the rents have gone up too. So
so these
knowing
numbers,
the delta is important.
and these numbers are all going to change
Yes.
because now we have, again, they're different issues. So one's a home price, and now with these higher interest rates, you're going to have a higher mortgage. It's going to keep more people in the rental pool. And then in addition to that, you also have rental growth, which is independent. So you have those two things happening independently, and it's one of the things that you need to track. It's one of the things that we track, because as you start to get into the teens, let's say, let's just pick on Fort Worth, Texas as an example. Fort Worth, Texas, you can buy it. The average home is $326, and the average rent is $1,200. Okay, so again, it's all it's 100 to 150 less, even almost close to 200 less to buy a home in Fort Worth. Yet the rents are not that far off, and so those are things that you need to look at as you guys are selecting your markets, right?
Yeah. Very good.
So make sure that you're considering that as well. The other one, let's talk about. It's actually more of an issue now than ever. Some of the government policies. Yeah. So what are you looking at?
For me, because I'm a property manager, is I'm looking for how difficult it's going to be to manage that property, and the costs of property taxes. What's happening there?
City inspections.
City inspections are huge. You have to know what kind of costs are going to be associated with that.
So for those of you who don't know what that is, we actually have avoided markets in Texas, of all places, because there are cities that require inspections. Essentially, think about this. Isn't they have literally inspectors that is it annual?
It is, and sometimes there's more than one, depending on if
they
it's the
literally
city
come out
or
to
the
your
state.
property and give you a checklist, and then you have a certain time to comply. So they're basically managing. It's not, again, these are not necessarily horrible things, because there are definitely landlords that need to be managed better. But these are as you start to get. By the way, those city inspections, guess who they cost? The landlord, not the city.
Right.
So
they'll charge you to inspect as well as to do anything.
Yeah, and then they make these long lists. And we've been on the other side of that. I remember in Baytown, I think we had, and they give you this long checklist, and they do give you time to cure, but some of the stuff can be a little bit ridiculous based on the inspector.
Well, and sometimes it's codes that change. I mean, more often than not, it's that you want to know what municipalities are going to not allow you to grandfather in an issue. So those codes that change can be very costly to ownership.
Yeah, like ADA or American Disability Act, fire sprinklering. Those are things that are now pretty standard. With your insurance policies. And so all of those things are important. We've had some issues with properties that we bought that did not have fire sprinklering. And then we had, I guess we had a hurricane, a tornado. Remember that one?
We had a hurricane, then a tornado
Yeah.
hit that same property.
Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
unfortunately.
The joys of ownership. So, and then we ended up
No loss of life, though.
Yeah,
all good.
Thankfully. But then we had to rebuild, and then we had to rebuild with, of course, new ADA compliance, new fire sprinklering, all that kind of stuff. So, but other governmental policy is the one that's, obviously front and center is the rent caps and rent control, right?
Very, very important to know what's happening with legislation there. I mean, even to the point of looking at what states or municipalities have some kind of moratorium on that. Like here in Arizona, there's a great deal of legislation that the local association has put into place to really fight that. There's ways around it, of course, for the municipalities to really bring in some rent control, but you got to know where it's coming and
this
what
is
you
a
have
big
to do
one,
to comply.
guys. This is prior to last year, let's say 2 years. This was something that you watched, but I don't think it was lower on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's really high because we have affordability issues hitting these cities. And so when the cost of housing goes up, homelessness goes up, all kinds of city funding and things like that go up. And so you want to, in my opinion, you want advocates that are looking at both sides. So you're always going to have the press and the tenants are always going to be aligned. And they're always going to be challenging these kinds of things. You're always going to see articles about rent growth, and you're always going to see articles about evictions and things like that based on laws that are in place. So you need to make sure that you have good representation, and this is where the National Apartment Association comes in, right?
Yes.
They have associations protecting the landlords in these markets, and it's an important time. It's something that you really should be taking a look at. Who's advocating on behalf of the landlord in some of these markets, and and it's not something that is completely going to go away. You're still going to have these issues, but you do need to have somebody that's watching. And I think that's part of the reason why Oregon snuck through that rent control, is they have extremely weak, so does Washington, extremely weak representation for landlords in those two markets.
Well, and it's important that you're part of the solution when you're involved with these organizations. I mean, what else can we do to provide affordable units to people who?
That's the other thing. Yeah, it's a lifeline between that. I know I can't even. How many meetings have we had with the governor and the mayors and the different people about affordability, impact fees, and all those kinds of things. So these government policies are big. And then the last one is on the expenses. So let's talk about that. If you take a look at, obviously you're on the ops side. So we manage properties all over the place. And we've managed stuff, in basically most of the western states for sure. And the differences of utilities, taxes, insurance, labor costs, insurance costs for on employee insurance, and it's dramatic, right? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah. I mean, when we're looking to buy a property or even get into a market, you want to know. Let's use insurance as an example. You want to know what's happening on a national level with major storms and what kind of pricing you think you're going to get into, because all of that has to be built right into any deal you're looking at or any market you're looking to go into.
Yeah, just as an example, Florida is obviously getting a lot of attention for, and it's up there for population growth. But if you buy in a multifamily, you're going to get pounded if you're buying on the coasts for hurricane insurance because of the history. So there's actuaries that actually look at, what's the history of loss in these particular markets. As the hurricanes come up either side of Florida, let's say, hit all the surrounding states and cities, those my friend once said that insurance companies actually don't pay claims. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, what they do is they build it into next year's premium. I'm like,
No question.
That does make sense. So that's the point. So, so while Florida on a rent and a price might look great, I'm probably going out on a limb by saying that the insurance costs are probably double than they are like in Arizona.
I would say.
At least.
Yeah. I think,
that doubles a big difference, guys.
Yeah.
Double. So that all has to, so if you got, let's say your rents are the same in, let's say, Fort Lauderdale as they are in Phoenix, but your insurance costs are double, then, all things being equal, you're better off probably not investing in Florida because you have to look at the whole picture.
That's a perfect point right there. Yeah.
And then you can move to Texas, and they're notorious for what?
Taxes.
Property taxes, right? And different markets are different, right?
They are. And, so looking and knowing what markets are, have requirements to either go to or close to what the property was purchased for, or understanding the disclosure or non-disclosure requirements in each state. Like Texas is a non-disclosure state.
It doesn't matter though.
But they find out. It's so easy to find out.
Non-disclosure means that you could buy something and it's not supposed to be disclosed, but somehow, some way they figure it out.
Yeah, but you have to be prepared to appeal every year in Texas. And if you don't have fortitude for that, don't go there. But the taxes are thousands higher per door per year.
So think about that. Again, same argument. So Phoenix, Florida, let's say Tampa or Naples, Florida, or Naples, Phoenix, or Dallas, okay? You're going to have very different tax structures. You're going to have very different insurance numbers. You're going to have very different utilities. Like in Texas, the utilities are not regulated, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so think about that. Again, these are nuances, guys, because when you're looking at cash flow, these are important, right?
Yeah. I mean, basically, they're not regulated, so you have to negotiate your per kilowatt hour,
which I love, right?
When it's a good price.
Yeah, so you can actually think about that. It's cool. Like a lot of you probably aren't used to this kind of stuff. The other thing is I found, remember when we were in Vegas, I tried to negotiate our trash and I got a call. Like the guy's like, like, really? I go, okay, never mind. So, so trash is very different.
It is.
Sewer and water is
some
very
cities
different.
require you use them, and you got no choice in the matter.
You got no choice.
You have to know that about
it's essentially
the
a
market.
monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that stuff's important. Some of it is regulated, which is also good because they're limited to their increases. Some of it is not. So as you start to dig in your expenses, you can't just look at rent growth, which I think a lot of times people focus on that. They look at, this is a market, and they start selling based on what happened last year or the year before based on rent growth. But you have to look at the whole picture, right? And so that's, that I think those are important. So our metrics are population, job growth, supply, barrier to entry, whole price to rent, government policies and expenses. There are more, but we're going to stop there because we only have an hour. Okay, so with that, those are some of the things that we're looking at. I know you guys want to hear about the markets that we like. Lesley did these cool little charts, and she metriced them out. So, all right, so let's talk about that. So what did you see based on all of the stuff that we just talked about?
I think what you said first is what I saw. Confusion. It can be very confusing to look at all of the data. You got to decide what's important to you. For us, what we just described related to job growth and population and really where rent's going, the number of jobs in migration, things of that nature, it really started to take shape for me. I actually felt as though the markets we're in are still going to continue to be great. They've been really tracking well. Phoenix is among the top properties or top markets.
Yep.
We also Austin, a lot of new jobs with Austin tech, a lot of tech there, and even though they've got a lot of sprawl in Austin. There's so much in-migration. Population growth was super high there. You have to weigh these out. I think Austin's their rent increase was somewhere around 16.5%.
That's a lot.
It's amazing, and their population growth was off the charts. 3 or 4% increase, depending on what submarket you're looking at. So, Phoenix and Austin were quickly among the top.
We knew that. Yeah, that's why we're there. Salt Lake City's been an interesting one.
It is.
So not on a lot of people's radar, but for different reasons. So think about this, guys. And hopefully I don't get slayed for this, but predominantly Mormon, predominantly bigger families, predominantly families stay in an area. So therefore, different kind of housing demand, right? But also there's a lot of job growth there, and the population growth is also growing there. So for different reasons. But the point is that it's hard to find product there. But you're going to find that Salt Lake City, I was noticing, has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. Actually, I think it is the lowest. It's like 1.4%.
Agree. Yeah.
So think of that, 1.4% unemployment. So again, what you're looking for are people that can pay, and so you want a low unemployment rate, right?
Agree. And I think that's the diversity in jobs that we see in that market.
Yeah.
I think that they've also had a great deal of new construction, and they've been continuing to build, but there's a lot of good balance there. But jobs, I think, primarily
and the other thing that's interesting, think about this, I don't know if you guys know, they're putting billions of dollars into their airport. It's now going to be an international airport. It never was before.
Yeah.
So why is that important? Because now there's no ski area, which I know for those of you who don't ski, but think about this. There's no ski area 1 mile, 1 hour, less than 1 hour from an international airport. So these are factors that you need to think about. Now, obviously, having an international airport brings all kinds of things. But Salt Lake, they've got stuff figured out there. They have very, very good strategic growth. We really like that market as well, right?
Agree.
Yeah. What else you got?
Another one was Raleigh, North Carolina.
Raleigh or Raleigh?
Raleigh. Depends on where you're from, I guess.
But that's another market we really like.
Yeah, jobs there are a big deal. Their occupancy is super strong, and but that rent growth, over 17%, and even though they're adding a lot of new units into that market.
And it's on the front cover of our. This is a CoStar, which we subscribe to. So this is another. This is a very, very, very strong market. You guys need to consider.
It is. Even I think what you said about the percentage of units compared to the market. This had new units coming close to 9%, but they're being absorbed really well, and so I think it's a darling market because they're really doing well to balance unemployment rates super low, populations up, so there's good in-migration to deal with that, and even household income has gone up like close to 10%, which is a pretty big deal.
That's another important factor to watch is household income, because what that means is, well, it could mean a bunch of things, but it could mean that some of the employers that are coming are higher paid. And that's an important thing to watch. I was talking to that economist, Paul. I think we did a video. We did a YouTube with him, right, Jerry? Podcast. And he was saying another really good thing to watch is office leases. Who's relocating and where? Because as you guys know, the office market's a bit disrupted because of work from home and all kinds of reasons. And so office leases are typically 5-7 year leases, and so the pandemic wasn't really that long ago as compared to looking at that. So as you start to see the downsizing and the relocations, you're going to start to see more and more job movement based on these big leases that are being signed in specific areas. That's happening in Raleigh.
It is.
I've been noticing.
And
Dallas too. Dallas has gotten a tremendous amount of corporate. Because if you're locked in on a lease somewhere, you're locked, right? And then as you're getting toward the end, you're like, okay, where do I want to be? What are the price of homes for my employees? What is the price of rent for my employees? And those are things that employers look at. And so I think before we had all this migration, we used to be able to follow like the Ryder trucks and the U-Hauls and all that kind of stuff. Now I think it's time for us to start to take a look at where these corporations are going to go based on the end of their leases, right? And that's kind of the next thing.
It is. And I think those higher paying jobs are really what I think you can measure through that median household growth. And, I was surprised at all of the different markets in Florida.
So there's so many. Like I love Florida, and if you look, I want to say we had 110,000 people move to Florida, something like that last year. The question is, where did they all go?
Oh my gosh!
I could be wrong here. It might be a lot more than that. Where did they all go? And that's confusing, because these submarkets are very, very different. You have some on the coast. You have some, in not on the coast. But you got Miami, you got Naples, you got
Fort Myers,
you got
Sarasota.
Sarasota,
Fort Lauderdale,
Orlando. So let's talk about that, because I know we were kind of digging into that, because we're also interested in Florida. Like, do we want to invest in Florida? And if so, where? Based on all the metrics that we already talked about, and I was surprised at your pick.
Well, yeah, and I definitely have vacillated back and forth on the 13 markets I was looking at in Florida, but one of them stood out to me. It was Naples.
Yeah, I
of
saw
all
that,
places,
which is a smaller town.
It is.
Yep.
It is, but they've boasted really high occupancy, great rent growth, 31.6% rent growth. I mean, that was the highest in the nation.
I saw that.
And they're, while they have new units coming, they're a smaller market, and a lot of what drives this area is tourism, but they're adding jobs. So
that's right. So what that tells me, guys, is that there's, again, a short supply of housing for a lot of people going there. You don't get that kind of rent growth for for some of these bigger markets. So we'll have to dig into Naples a little bit more, but I was just there 2 months ago, and it's kind of anti-growth a little bit. A lot of those coastal markets are, and that's okay. But again, barrier to entry. That's why we brought that one up. If you can't add a lot of supply to something, it's not going to disrupt it, and it's certainly not going to. What'll happen is people will start to rent elsewhere. The employers will stop moving there.
Out migration.
And so when affordability kind of starts peaking, which we see, then what happens is people start to look for that secondary and third, tertiary markets, right?
Agree.
What else you got?
Well, I think those were the markets that I was mostly focused on. I mean, there's so many. I mean, you can get mired down into these, a lot of the broker opinions about where to buy, what's happening in these markets. But these numbers, I mean, depending on what's important to you, and to us, it wasn't just chasing the high rent. It's making sure we got good balance. So
I think that's the mistake a lot of people do, is they focus on rent growth. As you notice, we haven't really talked about it too much. It's if your guys are starting with rent growth, then that's a mistake. In other words, and investing that way, there's nothing wrong with starting at rent growth and then looking back and seeing, what's going on here. And so it is something that you definitely want to look at, but it's the underlying factors behind it is what's most important. What are the components of why rent is growing like that? Not just it's going to do it again next year.
And will it continue?
Yeah. So as you guys start to invest with other people, or you're raising money yourself, as you're redirecting, you'll notice that we're not in Ohio. We're not in Nebraska. We're not in Kansas. Not saying those aren't good markets, But the point is you got to be careful on, or some of these second and third tier markets. What we're finding is a lot of people, because they can't compete in the first or second tiers, they're investing in the third tier, even fourth tier, and they're selling, all the reasons behind that. And so that's why we went through this whole list for you, is that you really, if you're investing with someone, you need to be asking all these questions. You need to be finding out, because I've been on the other side of it. We've been in markets where military's been deployed. We've been in markets where oil and gas has dropped and it's affected us, dramatically. We've been in markets where the Border Patrol jobs were cut. And the market was predominantly based on Border Patrol. Those are real things that happen, right?
Yeah. How do you mitigate around it? A key is buying it right and being honest about what could happen there.
Yep. And if you guys have any more questions, of course, we're going to continue to dig into this stuff. We actually have a meeting between Ross and David and Leslie and I on this issue, so we can kind of figure out on where we want to go as a company too, because certainly we're in Phoenix and Tucson, and we're certainly in Texas. Most of the market's in Texas, but should we be looking elsewhere as well, right?
Right.
Yeah. So before we jump off, by the way, thanks guys for listening. Let's do a couple questions from our inner circle members. You ready?
Yeah.
I'm going to have you answer.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on.
Bring it.
This is from Omar. If you were a first-time home buyer living in Arizona, would you wait or go forward with buying a house?
So, home purchases are they're a tougher market right now. There's really a lack of supply, but the way I see it and feel being here for so many years is that these home values aren't going to necessarily regress. They're just going to slow down in the amount that they appreciate. So regardless of when you enter, especially if your goal is to stay there for a long time, get in, get the best rate you can. And it may not appreciate as much as it has over the last couple of years, but my thought is that it's not going to regress.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with Michael Chandler, of all things. Remember, he just won his fight this weekend.
Yeah.
I was over. He invited me over to his pool party the night after he won.
Who don't you know, Ken?
I know.
Come on, man.
I went over there and we were talking about this, and I said, Phoenix is still affordable. Like it really is.
It is.
You can buy a nice home here for $500,000, right?
Yep.
Very nice home. Now, that's certainly not cheap. That home would have been $400,000 a couple of years ago, but the point is, it's still, with interest rates, it's a little worse. But I think you hit it on the fact that, is Omar here long term, or is it a shorter term? I don't know. And I think one of the mistakes people have is they're always trying to time stuff. And for us, we're looking for cash flow. If it's your home, Omar, and you're buying for the long term, like I've been in Phoenix for over 20 years. So obviously I'm way in the money on everything, and I don't flip around and same with you, right? You've been in the
not
same
on our
home.
homes.
Yeah, so it's just very different question. So it's a good one though.
Thank you.
So let's talk about ST. He watched the video titled Here's What Happens as Interest Rates Rise: The Impact on Home Builders, Homeowners, and Renters. How would multifamily be affected by all of this? Will the cap rates increase? Is it still a good time to invest in multifamily? What do you think?
What do you think?
Oh,
Let me turn it around on you.
Jesus.
That was a big question.
The one with by the way, guys, the person asking the question is always in control. Okay,
I learned
so
that from you.
I'll answer this one. So yes, I think one of the bigger issues right now that everyone needs to consider is our cap rates. So a cap rate is you just divide the NOI into the purchase price, and that determines your cap rate. And the cap rates right now are sub 4% on stuff that we're looking at. So if cap rates go up to 5, all this work that we did on the rents and the value adds and all that stuff is gone, because if the property trades at 5, because that value add is gone. So cap rate risk, I think, is something that we're definitely looking at because interest rates are rising. So yes, I do believe that cap rates are going to go up a little bit from what they are. We're already seeing some pushback. We were bidding on a project last week, and the seller didn't get the price they wanted. So they're thinking about holding off and keeping the property. So because we were focused on cash flow alone. Yes, I still believe it's a good time in multifamily, but you got to be very careful. So like with that example that we just had, this property was in Tucson. We underwrote the property on what we thought it would do, right?
Agree.
What we thought the rents would do. It was a bit of a value add, which was also good. The property we just bought in Austin had a $400 value add because the owner had it for like 17 years, and he was kind of neglecting it. And it's in Austin, one of the hottest markets in the country. So that's what we call forced equity. So if you're buying something that's, somebody's already done all the work to, you might want to be careful, especially if you're doing some kind of bridge, some kind of interest rate, that's not fixed, because you have some interest rate risk, I believe. You have some cap rate risk. And then depending on where you're getting your money, like if it's with a big institution or a fund or something that you partnering with or have on your own, your price of your equity is a big deal. And so I should probably do a video on this.
I think that's a great idea.
It's because I think people that are raising capital right now and overpaying, that have floater interest rates, are at risk. Big time. You think about it, the mortgage payment, the ability for the mortgage payment to go up, definitely what can wipe out cash flow and really dig hard into your cash flow.
Oh,
right?
There's so much to talk about with that.
Yeah,
there's ways to mitigate around it too.
So I do believe that we have a massive need for multi-housing. I do believe that it's still a great investment, but if you have to exit in say 3 to 5 years, I think you might lose all that through cap rate risk, and I think that you could lose the cash flow through interest rate risk. So those are. What do you think?
I totally agree. You have to buy it right, and the debt that you place has got to be appropriate. And when you're underwriting, you can't paint the blue sky of a low cap rate for your exit. You got to be really realistic. Yeah,
that's another good question for you people investing. If your syndicator or whoever you're investing with is showing a lower cap rate than you're buying from, that's how they're making the numbers work. So a lot of the big money is looking at the exit cap, and the exit cap
should always be higher.
Yeah, in my opinion, based on what the market's doing right now. And the Fed has said that they're going to raise more rates. I mean, heck, 3/4 of a basis point already. And just, just talking about what's happening with us, because we get on our investment committee calls every week. We're passing on deals because the debt is now killing the deal, right? So the seller, not even 4 or 5 months ago, had a number in mind based on the broker hype. And now the interest rates are killing the cash flow. So the buyers are looking at the cash flow because they're trying to solve the cash on cash and IRR. But the higher debt cost, the higher mortgage payment, is reducing that. And so therefore, I think there's going to be a lot of disappointed sellers this year in the multifamily space. What do you think?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think it's going to slow down the sales quite a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe make it.
Which is good because it's hot right now.
It's a lot to underwrite.
Prices to flatten. But I still very, very, very bullish about multifamily because of the supply issue. So you have to buy right, and you have to, if you're not worried about cap rate growth, then I think you'll probably be okay. So, ST, that was a good question. Yeah, you didn't even answer it though.
I just listened.
I know. So anyway,
agreed, nodding.
Yeah.
Politely.
Leslie, it's been awesome having you on. She's going on vacation next week. So next week is a surprise. Actually, Danielle will be here next week, and then we'll put out another good topic. And by the way, if you guys have great topics and you have some things that maybe we didn't cover today, please send them to us because we really do like. I love to dig into this stuff, and these lives are for you. So thank you, and as always, enjoy your week, guys. Cheers.